So let me present to you a situation you might have actually encountered in the past and or seen through friends that you've hung out with. Let's say you're a newer player into the game, you're excited to start playing with cards, and you're looking for the optimal archetype and or deck to sort of bring out your interests in the format. You start looking through YouTube videos, looking on forums, wherever it is that you search for your Yu-Gi-Oh related information, and you stumble upon P.U.N.K, an archetype with very beautiful art and a playstyle that seems to be relatively viable. So you start looking into YouTube videos, trying to find the optimal deck list. However, as you start doing so, you start to realize that a lot of these deck lists have a lot of expensive cards in them. You see Access Code, which is still relatively high. You see Kashtira Fenrir, which is like $80 per copy, and most people are playing 3 of. You see Bystial names, which, although they aren't too pricey, the fact that you need to play 3 of them most of the cases ends up adding a ton. So you feel discouraged to continue trying to pursue a P.U.N.K deck list as a result. Is that necessarily the right mindset? Well, I'm here to say no. In fact, you don't actually need these Bystial names to play the deck. You can actually play P.U.N.K as a pure version in under $100. And that is the topic of today's video. My name is Toon World, and we're going to be trying to figure out the best way we can play P.U.N.K under $100 so that you can enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh without having to break the bank, without having to, go the extra mile, saving extra money to buy all these cards that definitely can boost the strategy, but aren't necessary to actually win games in a local environment, which is the most common place where you'll be playing Yu-Gi-Oh, and even in some regional cases, and with some luck, YCSs. So, today, this video, if you've seen my videos in the past, it's going to be a little bit different from those other videos. Today, I'm mostly going to be talking about prices and options as opposed to deck choices themselves. If you're a newer player and you want those extra bits of detail on why I'm playing certain ratios, I would recommend checking out my recent Bystial deck profile. I know that there won't be any Bystial names in today's video. Regardless though, a lot of the thought process that I have put into the ratios you'll see here are the same as those ratios that you saw in that deck list, even though this deck list again doesn't have Bystials in them. So please keep that in mind, but regardless, today, again, prices and options, I'm going to lay out for you all of the cards I have in my proposed deck list. We're going to talk about them in terms of where they fit into things, where they fit into your budget. At the end, we'll have a summary of how the prices break down in actuality so that you have a better grasp of where you need to allocate your resources. And of course, I'll give you some input on how I think a budget list can do in this tier-dominated format. So that out of the way, I know I said that out of the way already. Usual disclaimers, remember that I am not the perfect duelist. I always say this in my videos just to remind you that you don't need to take all of my advice full-heartedly. I do make mistakes and I'm not super active in the game, so some of my information I provide to you might be misinformed. I don't want you to feel offended as a result. Secondly, P.U.N.K is very, very versatile. You'll see as I go through this video that I do list a lot of different choices, and so even though I have a deck list prepared here, you can vary it according to my suggestions and or according to your own preferences. Now, all of that out of the way, remember to like and subscribe. I do appreciate it. The channel continues to grow and I love that. And I will get on with the video here. If you're worried at all about the Bystial names I threw at the start of this video, don't worry about them at all. They're on my desk, safe. I didn't crumple them or anything. I still want you to worry if I was accidentally trashing like $15 worth, or no, it's like $25 worth of cards. Anyhow, let's get to the quote-unquote deck profile. It's like a pseudo deck profile, I guess. I'm showing you cards that I think you should play, but I'm not going to be talking about their ratios as I talked about in the start of the video. I'm mainly talking about their accessibility and what you can do with them. So the P.U.N.K names, obviously the core of the deck. These are the ratios I chose to play. You don't have to play them this way. Again, you have to check out my Bystial deck profile that I recently posted to understand why I'm playing them as they are here. In terms of price, the main deck P.U.N.K monsters, the prices vary basically. So the level 3s are all very cheap. Most of these are under $1, so you won't have to worry about shelling out a ton of money for those. The Foxy Tune is going to be your most expensive card. This is a mandatory 3 of, and it is $11 per. So this is $33 already out of your budget, but again, it is worth it. Mandatory 3 of, definitely vital to the strategy. 3 Ogre Dance is also necessary. Fortunately, this isn't a very pricey card. It's only $2, I think, per. So not too much to worry about there. The 3 Deer Note, this is 2 to 3. You can cut this down to 1 to save some costs there. I'm choosing to play 3 for reasons I again disclosed in my previous video, but most people are only playing 2. So you can opt to just drop this to 2. That saves money there. You don't have to worry about that at all. Overall, this part of the P.U.N.K deck is going to cost you around 50, I suppose, 45 maybe. And fortunately, if you do go to secondary vendors, let's say you're on forums like Reddit or Facebook, you find a nice deal for all these cards. Ignoring the collector's rares, I forgot to mention that the collector's rares obviously are more pricey than I said that these names are. The ultra rares, however, are the price that I had mentioned. But yeah, basically going to a second party vendor, it is possible that you could get this core for cheaper, which obviously gives you more space in that $100 range to purchase more tech cards that can be used with P.U.N.K. So this is the main engine. Try to get this if you can. And again, don't worry, this is most likely not going to break the bank for any of you. I do have to say though that if you did want to build this deck for under 50, I don't think that would be possible unless you got this engine for a big deal or a very cheap deal, because as you'll see, there are some inclusions in the extra deck and the main deck that do cost a little bit more. So for budget P.U.N.K, I think the best way you can play it is with just a ton of hand traps. The reason why I support this idea is, one, hand traps are always decent. Even though tier is notorious for sometimes playing through 2 to 3 hand traps, most of the time you can stop them with, say, a Crow Bell. And Crow and Bell are very cheap. Most of these hand traps are cheap actually. The Meisters, Veilers, Ogre, Crow, Bell, all under about $3 for their cheapest version. For example, I have the Prismatics here, but the ultra rare Dual Devastator versions are only, I think, $1, $2. All these you can find at lower rarity. In fact, I think the Meisters and the Crows are the lowest rarity. The Ash Blossom can also be found at the lowest rarity. Commons from the Crystal Beast structure deck, for example, are only $5. And of course, you can find these for $5. You don't need the Prismatics. But yeah, back to the point of why I think this is good. I said this in my previous videos as well. Basically, P.U.N.K has a field spell that can draw 2 cards, or every turn basically. So drawing to hand traps is very nice. It's a very easy option for newer players. So that's why I advocate for them. Also, hand traps are generic. They are very splashable. So I think this is a very great way to invest your money into the game if you were getting into it, because these hand traps, if you decide to go away with P.U.N.K, you sell it off. Hopefully you don't, of course, because it is a cool deck. But if you do, basically these hand traps can be shuttled into other decks, and you'll be fine. Tier, even though it doesn't usually play hand traps, if you play a weird budget version of Tier, you can throw these in that money isn't going to waste. If you're playing Sprite, you're playing Flunder, any rogue deck really can also just throw these hand traps in and you'll be perfectly fine. Yeah, so main deck not too bad. I think I'll actually do a cut for the spells and traps just in case I mess up the spells and traps, so give me 1 second. Okay, so we're back. Spells and traps. There aren't too many, which is again a good sign since most of your budget will be in this main deck. Again, we said this is around 45. This can be around, let's say 20, you know, you're around 60, 70 right now, which isn't bad. The spells and traps aren't very expensive. E-Telly is your honorary punk name. This tutors out all of your punk names and it's very cheap. The Grand Creator's copy from the same set that the punk cards are from, they're only $1 each, I believe, so very cheap to get. Extreme Session, also very cheap to get. It's just a super out of Pote, and it's not a particularly hard card to get as a result, so also cheap. And then I was choosing to play 2 trap cards, the Gabu and the Spider, which again are very cheap. I believe they're under $1. So overall, you know, this main deck isn't that pricey at all. Again, definitely under 100 gives you enough room for your extra deck. I do have some options to the side that you could throw in if you have more money. For example, I have this Psychic Tracker, which this thing can be searched off of the Dragon Drive and it can enable some rank or level 6 plays in terms of synchro monsters. So you could go down that route. For example, there's the zombie line Immortal Dragon. If you check out my Hybrid Punk video, or it might be the Punk Combo Sinnoh post Halka Fibrax ban, but you can search this with Dragon Drive. You can make level 6 synchros with it. Immortal Dragon lets you access some really weird synchro monsters like Cheng Ying, Baron, and the Mathmech, I think, Final Sigma. So this could be a nice option. You could also just play this as a searchable target off of Dragon Drive to make rank 3s. For example, when we get to the extra deck, you might be playing the Zeus package with Break Sword, Fortune Tune, Downerd, Zeus. And so this makes it a lot easier to get to that. So this is a nice budget option. Drone Lockbird, Nibiru, these are just examples of other hand traps you could play. Because Droll recently got reprinted, so it's not that bad. Nibiru also got reprinted recently, so you could also get this. Maybe not the best card to play in the main right now. I guess it varies, you know, some tier players aren't playing around it, so it might work fine. So you could substitute this in, basically. If you really want to play some Bystial names, Serenir is only $2. Including Serenir might be cute because it gives you access back to Shen Shen, the rank 9, or sorry, level 9 synchro. Newer players, basically, you would synchro summon Shen Shen, the virtual world monster, with a tuner plus a Bystial name, since it's level 3 plus level 6. So you could get Serenir replace like Bell or something. That's nice. There are other cards you can play, you know, Called By, Small World if you want to search hand traps. These are going to start layering on each other, but Harpy's Feather Duster, Cosmic, you know, all these are great options to try out. Something that might not be the best to play right now, but in future formats too, if you're watching this at a later time, for example, you could try out TCG. TCG is a very cheap card, and Punk can play it because most of our types are different, and this is a very nice floodgate in those formats where the main deck is centralized around one particular type. So yeah, I mean, this isn't bad, you know. You got fairly, I mean, it is, it's hard for me to say pricey or not. I'm not sure what your budget is. I'm just going off of a general sense, again, going with our $100 budget range. This is going to comprise most of your budget, but I do think that is pretty good because you're getting most of the deck already. The extra deck is very, very flexible, as you will see, and you know, of course, after I do my cut of the video, but it's good that the deck itself can be built under, what was it, 80 or something, and still give enough room for the extra deck under 100. So we're going to go to the extra deck now. Don't worry about trying to get this picture here now. I'm going to repost the entire deck profile, quote-unquote deck profile at least, with the extra deck at the end of the video. So let's get to the extra deck. The great thing about the extra deck is that it's very versatile. So outside of the 6 cards I'm going to show you here, there's so many different things you can throw into this extra deck that depending on your budget, if it is still $100 or if it is higher than that, you can fit a lot of great cards regardless of where you're at. But we do need to talk about the essentials, and the essentials here are your Rising Carp, your 2 Dragon Drive, your 2 Amazing Dragon, and your 1 copy of Psychic and Punisher. I'll go into a little bit detail here just so you understand. I think these ratios are absolutely necessary because Rising Carp, you only need 1 for the combo that involves Shirakusai going first. You don't usually summon this card going second outside of reviving it with Amazing Dragon, and it is very, very cheap. It's like a few cents, so don't have to worry too much there. Dragon Drive, you do need 2 copies of. I do see some people play 3 copies of it, but I don't think that's necessary. Of course, you can just bump it up to 3 because it's not that expensive at all. It's like $1 or so. So, do what you will there. Amazing Dragon, it is absolutely necessary to have at least 2 copies. You need 1 card or 1 copy for the going first disruption that you have, basically setting up Dragon Drive plus Shirakusai to bounce the cards during your opponent's turn. And then the second Amazing Dragon is necessary, I believe, for when you go into subsequent turns and you need to revive monsters for going for game and just for getting those extra bodies on the field for Link plays or XYZ plays. Your first copy isn't always going to stick past your opponent's turn, so that's why the second one comes into play under that context. Finally, the End Punisher. End Punisher is great. It is a win con in certain matchups, sometimes even a win con in games you didn't think you would win. For example, a lot of tier players are playing Underworld Goddess right now, I believe, but in the case they aren't, or in the case that you catch them off guard and they can't make it, Psychic and Punisher can win games in those matchups. So basically, I'm just trying to give you some hope that even though you're playing a budget list, there are some ways you can still do a lot more. You get a lot of bang for your buck even if you're spending less. At this point though, this is where things start to diverge because there's so many different things you can play to make up for the rest of the extra deck that I can only give you suggestions on what you want to put in. Some of my suggestions include, say, Cross Sheep, at least one of the Charmers here, Dark or Asa, a Unicorn, and then an Underworld Goddess. My main reasonings behind these is that the Cross Sheep is a great option to Link climb. Since it doesn't rely on your opponent versus the Charmers, you can trigger it with Rising Carp. Then you can go into Unicorn or build up to an Underworld Goddess. I go into more detail in my Bystial deck profile. The Charmers are great in this current format since Tier has Dark and Earth names. It's easy for you to make these 2, and they're cheap, so you can include them relatively easily in this budget list. Unicorn and Underworld Goddess, also fairly cheap. Underworld Goddess is probably 4. The rare copy of Unicorn is like 2 maybe. And they are great inclusions into this deck or any deck. Unicorn for very obvious reasons. Underworld Goddess just so you can deal with Towers decks that you might come across, say at locals, which again, I think this would be very beneficial for. There are more Link monsters you could play. You could dedicate space to Phoenix, Almirage, Lambda. Lambda especially I want to highlight here because I didn't talk about Gamma in the main deck portion of this video, but you can play 3 Gamma, 1 Driver in place of, let's say, the 3 Veiler, the 1 Gabu, and then Lambda isn't too expensive. It's like $2 for the secret, $1 or less for the gold rare. So you can include that, have that package there, and provide you another way to sort of give yourself more leverage over your opponent, where your lack of Bystials and Fenrir do sort of detract from that. In this context and sort of a leadway into the, segue into the synchros, you can also play Omega. Omega is fairly cheap for the gold rare, somewhat cheap for the secret rare. The idea here outside of this is that you do want another level 8 synchro monster for this deck outside of Dragon Drive. Even though Dragon Drive is an amazing level 8 synchro for this deck, having a second option is nice for those niche scenarios where you need something different. So Omega can fill that role and synchronize, sorry, I've been playing too much Pokemon. Synergize with Lambda. You can always play Draco Berserker or Savage instead. These two are pricier, but they are very effective. Of course, the cheaper option is to just play Drag type, which is what I would recommend for this particular list in general. Mainly the fact that this is a spell trap negate, and it's very easy to set up. You just need to get Rising Carp Engrave. You can then summon this, and this becomes that negate. So those are like some good examples. You can always play other off-brand things like Stardust Spark Dragon. You could play Red Dragon or Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend for time rules if you want. I'm not too much of a fan of playing like that. Also, I don't usually go into time, for better or worse. So up to you. I don't have a copy here to showcase to all of you. If you are playing Bystial Serenir, you can play a level 9 synchro like Shen Shen or the Stellar Wolf. I can't say the name, but you know, one of those two. Not necessary though, since you don't have access to the full Bystial package, and so it might not be optimal to play a level 9 synchro just for that one Serenir that you might not get to. It might be more optimal, however, to play XYZ monsters. Dingrissu is an example, a little pricey though. Hope Harbinger. I don't have pictures of it here, but you could play the Break Sword Fortune Tune Downerd Zeus package, which is very, very effective. Even, you know, basically, in spite of the fact that a lot of higher end Punk deck lists have cut that engine, for lower Punk deck lists, it works, and it's still a very nice option for going second. One, you need to break your opponent's board, and you might not have all the resources to access the rest of your synchro plays, so forth. There are, of course, many other options I haven't mentioned here. For example, you could put in a Boral Sword, you could put in a Boral Load, maybe Unchained Abomination. There are a lot of different synchro monsters that you could be playing. There are level 6 synchro monsters that you could be playing if you play Psychic Tracker. But these are some of the options I have just right up front for your selection. So this out of the way, I'm going to showcase to you the final deck profile I have for all of you, quote unquote, since I'm not going to detail into that deck profile relative to previous deck profiles. I'll give you some concluding remarks and then we will conclude the video. I realize this video is running longer than it needs to be, so I'm going to get on with a summary as quick as possible. After watching this video, I know it was somewhat ramble-like, you know, I was all over the places here and there. You can potentially ascertain the fact that you can build Punk for under $100. And at least in my opinion, I am biased because I am presenting this video. I do think you can still do well with this list at your locals and potentially at regionals if you play well. Even though you don't have access to the Bystial names, the Kashtira names, Baron, access code, whatever you idealize the best version of Punk to be, this deck can still pack a punch at this low of a budget because, again, the core engine is cheap and it is still very effective. Just being able to draw cards through your extreme session is oftentimes enough to win against a lot of road decks and is enough to keep up pace with even the best decks in the format. So this deck list you see here is a possibility in the way you can build this list. Nonetheless, it isn't the way you have to build this list. Again, I gave you a ton of options you could play early in this video. You might also find other options that I didn't talk about that you could supplement here. To quickly go through a summary of the prices, and you will see a pop-up similar to my disclaimers in the last video. Basically, Remember that your P.U.N.K engine's around $55. You can substitute out certain cards like the 3 deer nodes. Maybe if you want to, you can cut down on Overdance, but everything else I believe should be at a maximum, as you can see here. You could also vary some of the things. For example, maybe bump up some of the cheaper names so that you can subtract some of the more expensive names. You can switch out hand traps, get cheaper hand traps, go for different engines. The extra deck can be made to be more robust, or you can keep it as is. For example, you could add Zeus. I didn't have it here because it was kind of pricey. Also didn't have Dingrisu, so forth. So you can do what you want given what you have access to. Hand traps in this case are around, I said around 20, extra decks around 20, so you're around, let's say, 100. There are some additional notes I have, which you'll see on the pop-up as well, but regardless, the main gist here is that it's definitely doable to build P.U.N.K under $100. It's definitely viable to play the deck under $100, so don't feel discouraged. If you're a newer player, as I coined in my early scenario, and you're looking for a deck, you feel like this deck might not be for you because it has a lot of expensive options, despite the fact that you can in fact build this deck relatively well on a budget. So thank you everyone for watching this video. This is a newer type of video I want to try out, which is why it feels all over the place. I'm not sure how to plan these out quite yet. So I appreciate any feedback you can give me. If you have any comments on any choices I made throughout the video in terms of the deck itself, my explanation of the deck, and or the video editing in general, please let me know in the comments below. I do appreciate it. Remember to like and subscribe. I appreciate all of you subscribers for still being here and for continuing to watch my videos, which sometimes I don't always feel are the best quality, but that you still love regardless. I always try to do the best I can, but sometimes I might not have as much time, which is why things feel awkward, but thank you regardless for supporting me. At this point, I don't want to use up any more time with fluff, so we will cue the outro.